I caught my sister in a candlelit bathtub with our married neighbor, and hours later she shoved me into the lake to make sure no one would believe me. How does your own family turn you into the crazy one before you even open your mouth? My name is Brittany Shaw. I'm 36 years old, and I work as a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio. I've spent most of my life doing what responsible daughters do, showing up, helping out, swallowing my feelings so nobody else has to feel uncomfortable. And for 36 years, it still never seemed to be enough to earn a place in my own family's attention. But that weekend, my dad's 65th birthday weekend, changed everything. It didn't just expose my sister, it exposed the entire system that had been quietly crushing me for decades. The manipulation, the fear, the way truth can be buried alive in a family that's decided you're easier to ignore than to understand. And it started with something I thought was harmless, a gift. I drove 40 minutes from Columbus to my parents' old farmhouse outside Lancaster, Ohio, with a small bag on the passenger seat. Inside was a watch I'd spent 3 weeks looking for, not a flashy brand, not something expensive enough to make people gasp, but thoughtful. My dad loved old-fashioned things, solid things, things that lasted. I'd had his name engraved on the back. I wanted him to open it and know I'd actually paid attention. On the drive, I kept glancing over at that gift bag, like it was proof that I still believed in my family, proof that I was still trying. The afternoon sun was already softening into early evening when I pulled into the driveway. Everything looked exactly the same as it had when I was a teenager. White siding, green shutters, the big oak tree my father planted when I was born. Even the porch swing still creaked slightly in the wind, like it remembered every conversation my mother ever had out there. Some people feel warmth when they come home. Me? I felt something closer to resignation, like I was stepping into a role that had been written for me a long time ago. My mother opened the door with a distracted hug. Not cold, just elsewhere. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, like she was checking if someone else was behind me. "Oh, you're early," she said. Then, immediately, "Candace isn't here yet." Not, "How was the drive?" Not, "How are you holding up?" Just my sister's name, said with the kind of automatic urgency people usually reserve for storms and emergencies. Candace is my younger sister. She's 32. She's beautiful in a way that makes strangers want to protect her, even before they know what she's done. She's also the kind of person who's never stayed in one job longer than 6 months, and somehow still always has someone paying her rent. Usually my mother. Sometimes a boyfriend. Occasionally both. And my mother, my sweet, nervous, fragile mother, defended her with a fierceness that used to make me furious. For years I told myself it was favoritism, that Candace was the golden child, and I was the one who was expected to be mature and understanding. But standing in that kitchen, watching my mother arrange flowers for tomorrow's birthday party with hands that trembled slightly, I noticed something I'd never fully admitted. It wasn't just love in her eyes when she talked about Candace. It was fear. I set the gift bag on the counter and wandered into the living room. I told myself I was being paranoid, reading too much into tiny things. That's what I always did, talked myself out of my instincts to keep the peace. That's when I saw the photo on the mantel. It was old, slightly dusty, the kind my mother refused to replace because it captured a happy time. Candace was in it with a girl named Rachel, her former best friend. They were hugging, grinning like they had inside jokes the rest of the world couldn't understand. For years, Rachel had been everywhere. Sleepovers, holidays, graduation parties. Then one day, she was gone. I'd asked Candace about it once, and she shrugged like Rachel had simply stopped being useful. "She got jealous and crazy," Candace had said. I had to cut her off. I never questioned it. I was used to Candace editing reality like it was her personal hobby. But looking at Rachel's smile frozen behind glass, I wondered what she'd seen that made her crazy. I wondered if she'd tried to tell the truth and learned the same lesson I had. In our family, the first person to speak up is usually the first person to be blamed. The house felt quiet. Too quiet. My father was out getting supplies for the party. My mother kept darting between the kitchen and garden. I assumed I was alone until I heard it. Water running upstairs. At first I thought my mother left a faucet on. It's the kind of thing that happens in old houses. Pipes groan, someone forgets, and water just runs. I climbed the stairs, following the sound. It grew louder near the bathroom. The door was slightly open, not closed, not locked, just open enough to invite someone to peek in. Something in me hesitated, and I still pushed it wider anyway. The world didn't shatter in one dramatic explosion. It tilted, like my brain tried to protect me by slowing everything down. Candace was in the bathtub, and she wasn't alone. Rick Dalton, our neighbor, was in there with her. Rick was 45, married for 20 years to Linda Dalton. Linda was home right now battling cancer. Everyone in town knew it. People had dropped off casseroles, sent cards, talked about how brave she was. And there he was, in my parents' bathroom, with my sister. Candles flickered along the edge of the tub like someone had arranged the scene, like it was supposed to look romantic, intentional, cinematic. The air was thick with steam and something else that made my stomach turn. I froze in the doorway, unable to breathe. Candace turned her head slowly. She didn't gasp. She didn't scramble to cover herself. She didn't act caught. She looked at me with those pale blue eyes and smiled, small, cold, confident. "What are you going to do, Brittany?" she asked, like she was genuinely curious. Like this was a game and she had already memorized the ending. My throat tightened. I couldn't even form words at first. "Tell someone," she continued smoothly. "No one will ever believe you." Those words hit harder than the sight itself, because it wasn't just cruelty, it was certainty. It sounded rehearsed, polished, practiced, like she'd been saying it to herself in the mirror for weeks. And then, Rick Dalton looked away from me, like he couldn't even stand to meet my eyes. That's when I realized something that made my skin go cold. This wasn't an affair accidentally discovered. This was a setup. The door was open on purpose. The candles were placed on purpose. The timing, me arriving early, my father gone, my mother conveniently distracted, it was too perfect to be random. Candace wanted me to walk in. She wanted me to see it. And she wanted to control what happened next. I backed away from the doorway like I might fall apart if I stayed 1 second longer. My heart was slamming against my ribs. My mind was racing in circles. Why would she do this in our parents' house? Why would she let me see? The only answer that made sense was the one I didn't want to accept. She wasn't afraid of being exposed. She was counting on it. I stumbled down the hallway, my hands shaking so badly I had to grip the banister to keep steady. All I could think was, "Tell Dad. Dad will listen. Dad will believe you." Because if my father didn't believe me, then Candace was right. No one would. And just as I started down the stairs, I saw my mother in the kitchen, waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes full of a nervous pleading that made my stomach drop. She looked at me like she already knew, like Candace had already spoken first. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't walking into a family gathering. I was walking into a trap that had been set long before I arrived. And somehow, I was the only one who didn't get the script. My mother didn't ask what I'd seen upstairs. She didn't ask why my face had gone pale or why my hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep them at my sides. She just stood there in the kitchen, like a guard at a gate, blocking me from the one person I still believed might listen. "Brittany," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk." The way she said it, tight, urgent, almost rehearsed, made my stomach sink. It wasn't the tone of a mother checking on her daughter. It was the tone of someone trying to prevent an explosion. Before I could even form a sentence, she leaned closer and whispered, "Candace told me you've been acting strange." I blinked at her, not understanding. "She said you were staring at her?" My mother continued, eyes darting toward the living room, asking inappropriate questions, making her uncomfortable. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard. I'd walked into the bathroom and seen my sister in a bathtub with a married man, and somehow, I was the one being framed as inappropriate. I looked past my mother and saw Candace sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, legs crossed, posture relaxed, like she was the picture of innocence. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't nervous. She looked entertained, like she'd already won something. My mother's jaw trembled as she said, "I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm asking you, please don't cause trouble this weekend. Your father's birthday is tomorrow." Can we just have one peaceful gathering? I opened my mouth. The words were right there. Mom, I just saw Candace in the bathtub with Rick Dalton. Candace is sleeping with a married man. Candace set this up. But my voice wouldn't come. Not because I was scared of Candace, because I was staring at my mother's hands. They were trembling. Not with anger, not with indignation, with fear. It was subtle, something I might have missed if I wasn't watching closely. But it was there. The way her fingers clenched and unclenched against her apron. The way her eyes kept flicking back to Candace like she was checking for permission. The way her shoulders sat slightly hunched, like she'd been carrying a weight for too long. My mother wasn't defending Candace out of blind love. She was following instructions. And suddenly, the kitchen didn't feel like a kitchen. It felt like a hostage negotiation. I swallowed hard. Mom, I started carefully. I'm not the one causing trouble. Her eyes widened. She shook her head quickly, almost panicked, as if she couldn't allow me to finish that sentence. Please, she whispered. Just, please. That single word cracked something open in me, because for the first time in my life, I realized my mother wasn't my ally. She was terrified of my sister, and if she was that afraid, then whatever Candace was doing was bigger than an affair. I stepped back slowly. I forced myself to nod like I was agreeing, like I was calming down, like I wasn't about to collapse from the pressure of holding truth inside my chest. Fine, I said, voice quiet. I won't ruin Dad's birthday. My mother exhaled shakily, relief washing over her face so fast it almost made me nauseous. It was the relief of someone who had just prevented a disaster. Candace's gaze lifted from the living room. Our eyes met, and she smiled again. Not a warm smile. Not even a smug smile. A knowing smile. The kind of smile that says, I told you. No one will believe you. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get out of that house before I said something that would give Candace exactly what she wanted, an emotional outburst she could twist into proof. So I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The evening air was cool and smelled like damp earth and cut grass. I walked toward the driveway, trying to steady my breathing, trying to tell myself I could still fix this. My father would be home soon. I could pull him aside privately. I could show him the truth. I could. Brittany. The voice came from the shadows near the garage. My heart jumped so violently I felt it in my throat. Rick Dalton stepped forward. Up close, he looked nothing like the confident neighborhood dad who waved at people from his porch. His face was drawn, his eyes were bloodshot, his skin looked sallow, like he hadn't slept properly in months. His shoulders sagged under a weight I couldn't name. He looked desperate, and that terrified me more than anger would have. I know what you saw earlier, he said, hands shoved deep into his pockets. And I understand you're upset, but I need you to think very carefully before you do anything. I stared at him, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to scream at him. Part of me wanted to demand how he could do this while his wife was fighting cancer. But I forced myself to stay still. Candace wanted me to react. I could feel it. Like the whole world was waiting for me to become the unstable villain in her story. Rick swallowed. My wife is sick, he said quickly. She's barely holding on. If you say anything, if you spread rumors, you'll be the woman who destroyed a family during their darkest hour. His voice shook on the word destroyed, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. They'll remember that, he continued. People will remember you as the one who kicked Linda when she was already down. There it was. The guilt weapon. Not what he did, but what I might do by telling the truth. He was trying to make me responsible for the consequences of his betrayal. Trying to make me the cruel one. But something about the way he spoke felt off. He didn't sound threatening. He sounded coached. Like he'd practiced these lines. Like someone had handed him a script and told him exactly which emotional buttons to press. And then he made a mistake. He glanced over his shoulder toward the house, then back at me, and said, Candace warned me you'd try something like this. The words hung in the air. I felt my entire body go cold. Rick blinked, realizing what he'd admitted, and his face drained of color. He opened his mouth to backtrack, but it was too late. Candace warned him. Candace expected me to confront him. Candace anticipated my moves. Candace had prepared him. Rick wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn, a puppet, a guilty man being pulled by strings he didn't even understand. I took a slow step closer, lowering my voice. How long has this been going on? Rick's eyes flickered. Shame. Fear. Confusion. I don't know, he stammered. It's not what you think. I almost laughed, but the sound would have come out broken, because it was exactly what I thought. Worse, actually. It was something planned, something staged. I could see it now. The unlocked bathroom door, the candles, the timing of my early arrival. Candace wanted me to walk in. She wanted me to witness it. She wanted to create a moment she could twist. Rick shifted his weight nervously. Look, he said, voice dropping. Just don't say anything. Please. For Linda's sake. Linda. He used her name like a shield, like a holy word that made him immune from consequences. And for a second, my anger turned into something sharper and clearer. If he truly cared about Linda, he wouldn't be here. He wouldn't be standing outside my parents' garage begging me to protect his secret. He wouldn't have been in that bathtub at all. Rick took a step back, as if he'd said too much. Candace said you were unstable, he muttered, almost under his breath. She said you've always had issues with her. There it was again. The narrative. The story Candace had already planted in everyone's mind. Jealous older sister. Bitter, unstable, always making things up, always causing drama. I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt clarity. Candace had positioned everyone perfectly. My mother silenced by fear. Rick controlled by guilt and desperation. And me cast as the unreliable witness. The only question was why. What was her endgame? Why would she go to this much trouble just to humiliate me? Unless humiliation wasn't the goal. Unless she needed me discredited for something bigger. I didn't say another word to Rick. I just walked past him and back toward the house, my mind racing. Inside, the smell of dinner filled the air. My mother moved around the kitchen like a nervous bird, refilling glasses, avoiding my eyes. Candace laughed softly at something on her phone, perfectly relaxed, like she hadn't just shoved a knife into the center of my life. And then I saw my father's chair at the table empty. He still wasn't home. Candace had timed everything. She knew exactly when I'd arrive, exactly when Dad would be gone, exactly when Mom would be alone and vulnerable, exactly when Rick could corner me outside. It was like watching a spider web reveal itself after you've already stepped into it. That night, the early birthday dinner began. Just family and a few neighbors. Candace sat beside my father when he finally arrived, slipping into her role like she was born for it. She toasted him with a trembling voice and perfectly timed tears. Everyone cooed. Everyone softened. Everyone leaned in. I watched her carefully now, and I noticed something I'd never noticed before. Before every emotional moment, Candace glanced around the table to make sure people were watching. Before every tear, she checked her audience. It wasn't emotion, it was performance. And my mother flinched every time Candace leaned close to whisper something in her ear. The flinch was small, almost invisible, but it was there. My father smiled at Candace's stories, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes he watched her like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd been avoiding for years. And then the Daltons arrived. Rick sat stiffly, barely eating, face pale and tense. And Linda Dalton walked in slowly, thinner than I remembered, but with eyes so sharp it startled me. She looked like a woman who had already stared death in the face and decided she wasn't afraid of anything else. During dessert, I passed behind her chair on my way to the kitchen. Without looking at me, she pressed something into my hand. A folded napkin. I slipped it into my pocket, my heart pounding. I didn't unfold it until later, alone in the bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror like I needed proof I was still real. When I opened it, I saw a phone number written in shaky handwriting, and 3 words that made my breath catch. Call me, private. Linda knew, and she wanted to talk. I slipped the napkin back into my pocket, hands trembling not with fear this time, but with something new, hope. Because if Linda was reaching out to me, it meant Candace hadn't controlled every piece of the board. Not yet. And just as I was leaving the bathroom, Candace appeared in the hallway, blocking my path with that sweet, sisterly smile. "Walk with me," she said softly, nodding toward the back door. "The lake. We should talk, just us." Her voice sounded gentle, but her eyes were cold. And deep in my gut, I knew I was about to find out what my sister was really capable of when no one was watching. Candace stood in the hallway like she owned the air between us. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, the same tone she used when she wanted other people to think she was the reasonable one. "Walk with me," she said, tilting her head toward the back door. "We should talk, just us, like sisters." For a split second, I considered saying no. I could feel every instinct in my body telling me to stay inside, where there were witnesses, where my father could see us, where my mother might at least pretend to intervene. But there was something else in me that night, something stubborn, something tired. I had spent 36 years swallowing my words, smoothing things over, letting Candace take up all the space in the room while I learned to shrink. If I backed down now, she would take that as permission. If I refused to follow her, she'd twist it into proof that I was unstable again, that I was the one avoiding a calm conversation. So I nodded. "Fine," I said quietly. Candace's smile widened just slightly. Not warmth, victory. We slipped out the back door into the cool Ohio evening. The air smelled like damp grass and wood smoke from someone's distant fireplace. Behind my parents' farmhouse, the path to the lake cut through tall weeds and a line of trees that had always felt comforting when I was younger. When I was a kid, that lake was where we played, where my father taught us to skip stones, where my mother took pictures of us with our hair tangled by wind and our knees dirty with summer. That night, it felt like a different place. The mist was already rising off the water, turning the surface into something dark and unreadable. The trees around it stood like silent witnesses. Candace walked ahead of me, unbothered by the cold, unbothered by anything. She didn't look like someone sneaking around after doing something shameful. She looked like someone escorting me to an appointment. When we reached the water's edge, she stopped and turned toward me. The fake softness dropped from her face so quickly, it was almost shocking. It was like watching a curtain fall. "You're going to keep your mouth shut," she said. The words weren't a warning. They were an instruction. I stared at her, my heart pounding, but I forced myself not to flinch. I knew now that Candace fed on reaction. If I cried, she would mock me. If I yelled, she would call me unstable. If I begged, she would feel powerful. So I kept my voice calm. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't see what I saw," I said. "Candace, Rick's wife is dying." For the first time since I'd walked into that bathroom, something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt. Not shame. Frustration. Like I had messed up her timing. Like I wasn't reading from the lines she'd written for me. "Don't be dramatic," she said, rolling her eyes. "You always do this. You always act like you're the moral center of the universe." I almost laughed at the absurdity. My sister had just been caught sleeping with a married man, and she was calling me dramatic. I took a slow breath. "Why did you do it here?" I asked. "In Mom and Dad's house. Why would you let me see?" Candace's mouth curved into a small smile. "Because I wanted you to see," she said simply. The honesty in that sentence hit me like a slap. I swallowed. "Why?" She stepped closer, and her voice lowered into something almost intimate. "Because you've always been in my way, Brittany. You don't even realize it. You think you're invisible, but you're not. You're the one person in this family who still has a spine." My skin prickled. "You're going to stop," I said, forcing the words out. "You're going to stop lying. Stop manipulating Mom. Stop." Candace's eyes hardened. "Or what?" she asked. "You'll tell Dad? You'll tell Linda? You'll tell the whole town?" She tilted her head, studying me like a scientist watching an experiment. "Go ahead," she whispered. "I want you to." The confidence in her voice made my stomach turn. "No one will believe you," she continued, slow and deliberate. "Because I've already told them what you are." My throat tightened. "What I am?" Candace smiled. "Jealous, bitter, unstable. The older sister who never got over the fact that Mom loved me more." Her words were cruel, but the cruelty wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how perfectly she understood the weak points in our family, how she knew exactly which story people were already willing to accept. She stepped back and spread her hands slightly, as if presenting the lake behind her like a stage prop. "You could scream right now," she said. "You could accuse me. You could make a scene. And do you know what would happen?" I didn't answer. Candace's eyes gleamed. "Mom would cry and beg you to stop. Dad would tell you to calm down. Rick would look ashamed and say you're lying. And everyone would agree that you need help." She paused, then smiled wider. "It's almost boring how predictable you are." My hands curled into fists at my sides. My entire body was trembling, but I forced myself to keep my voice level. "I'm not going to play your game," I said. That was the moment her expression shifted. For the first time, Candace looked rattled. Not because she was afraid, because she was annoyed. Because her plan required something from me, and I wasn't giving it. She needed me to react. She needed me to explode. She needed me to become the unstable sister in front of witnesses so she could seal the narrative. And I was refusing. Candace's eyes narrowed. "You're going to ruin everything," she hissed. "I'm going to tell the truth," I said quietly. Her face tightened. "Truth?" She spat. "Truth is just whatever people believe. And people believe me." She took one step closer. I could see the anger vibrating under her skin now, the way a calm surface hides a storm. "Say it," she demanded suddenly. "Say you're sorry. Say you imagined it. Say you're going to stop." I stared at her, stunned by the intensity. "No," I said. The word barely left my mouth before everything happened at once. Candace shoved me, hard, both hands on my chest, no hesitation, no warning. The force knocked the breath out of me. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a root, and the world tilted into darkness. For a split second, I saw the sky gray-blue, misty, indifferent. Then the lake swallowed me. The water was shockingly cold, like being punched all over. It rushed into my nose and mouth, and panic exploded in my chest. My clothes dragged me down. My arms flailed, grabbing at nothing. I fought my way up, coughing, gasping, choking as I broke the surface. The mist clung to my face. My hair plastered to my cheeks. My hands scraped against mud as I tried to pull myself toward the shore. Candace stood above me, dry, still, watching, not like someone who had made a mistake, like someone watching a plan unfold. I hauled myself out of the water, shivering so violently my teeth hurt. My whole body felt numb. My hands were slick with mud and lakeweed. Candace's voice cut through the night, sharp and furious. "You were supposed to lose it," she snapped. I froze. "What?" I croaked. "You were supposed to scream," she hissed, stepping closer. "You were supposed to run back to the house, soaked and hysterical, so everyone could see how crazy you are. That was the point." My blood ran cold, not from the lake water, but from the truth in her words. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was strategy. She didn't push me because she was angry. She pushed me because I wasn't playing the role she'd written for me. I stared at her, trembling. "You planned this," I whispered. Candace's eyes flashed. "You think you're smarter than me?" she said. "You think you can take what I have?" Her voice lowered into something venomous. "You've spent your whole life waiting for them to love you. You'll never get it. Not if I don't want you to." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind was trying to process the reality that my sister wasn't just selfish or spoiled. She was dangerous. Not in a dramatic, movie villain way. In a quiet, calculated way. The kind of dangerous that ruins your life without leaving bruises anyone can photograph. Candace stared at me for another long second, then turned and walked away up the path like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just shoved her sister into freezing black water. I stood there shaking, soaked to the bone, watching her disappear into the darkness, and I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had tried to win Candace's approval, tried to avoid her anger, tried to keep the peace. But standing there, dripping lake water onto my childhood earth, I realized something simple and terrifying. My sister wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to feel remorse. and she wasn't going to let me tell the truth unless someone forced her. I made my way back to the house, every step heavy, my clothes clinging to my skin. I slipped in through the back door and crept upstairs, not wanting anyone to see me yet. I didn't want my mother's panic. I didn't want Candace's performance. I didn't want my father's confusion. I just wanted to breathe. In my childhood bedroom, I peeled off my soaked clothes and changed into dry pajamas with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself that what happened was real. My sister pushed me into a lake. Not because she lost control. Because I didn't. Around midnight, when the house had gone quiet and my body had finally stopped shivering, I heard a soft tapping at my window. My heart jumped into my throat. I moved slowly, pulled back the curtain, and saw an elderly woman's face illuminated by the porch light next door. Eleanor Brooks, our quiet neighbor. She raised a hand and whispered urgently through the glass. I saw what happened. Then she held up something small in her fingers. A USB drive. My security camera recorded it, she mouthed. And in that moment, for the first time since I arrived at my parents' house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not helplessness. Hope. Because Candace had made one fatal mistake. She thought no one was watching. But someone was. And now the truth finally had a witness. I stared through the glass at Eleanor Brooks for a full second before my body remembered how to move. She stood on the lawn between our houses, the porch light catching the silver in her hair and the sharpness in her eyes. In one hand, she held a small USB drive like it was something fragile. In the other, she raised her palm in a calming gesture, as if she could see my heart pounding from where she stood. I saw what happened, she whispered again, her breath fogging the window, and my security camera recorded it. For a moment, I couldn't even process the words. My brain was still stuck in the lake, still hearing Candace's voice hissing that I was supposed to scream, supposed to lose it, supposed to play my part. I unlocked the window with shaking hands and pushed it open. Eleanor moved quickly, far quicker than I would have expected from a 8-year-old widow. She didn't climb in clumsily or ask permission like a timid neighbor. She swung one leg over the sill, then the other, and stepped into my childhood bedroom like she'd been here before. Like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. She set the USB drive down on my desk and looked at me carefully. Her face wasn't lit with excitement or gossip. It was serious, protective, almost familiar. Sit, she said gently. You're shaking. I didn't realize I was until she said it. My whole body was trembling, partly from the cold water earlier, partly from shock, and partly from something deeper. A lifetime of being dismissed was colliding with the reality that I'd just been physically assaulted by my own sister. I sat on the edge of my bed, hugging my arms around myself. She pushed me, I said, voice hoarse. She actually pushed me. Eleanor nodded once, slow and grim. I know. I stared at her. Why were you watching? The question came out sharper than I intended. Eleanor didn't flinch. She just took a seat in my desk chair and folded her hands in her lap like someone preparing to tell a hard truth. I wasn't watching you, she said quietly. I was watching her. The air in the room shifted. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. I've lived next door to your parents for over a decade, she said. I've seen you come and go. I've seen the way your mother changes when your sister is around. I've seen the way your father goes quiet. And I've seen your sister. Do what she does. What does she do? I whispered. Eleanor's eyes hardened. She manipulates, she said simply. And she does it like it's breathing. She doesn't just lie. She rewrites people. My throat tightened. No one ever believes me, I said, and the words came out before I could stop them. It's like I'm screaming inside my own head and everyone else is living in a different reality. Eleanor's expression softened not with pity, but with recognition. That's exactly how it feels, she said. Then she paused, and her voice dropped into something raw. 15 years ago, she began, my own daughter did the same thing to me. I blinked. Your daughter? Eleanor nodded, eyes fixed on a spot somewhere past my shoulder, like she was watching the past replay. She wasn't violent at first, she said. Not physically. She was charming, clever, She knew how to make people feel special when she wanted something from them. Eleanor let out a small, bitter laugh. She was beautiful too. People always want to believe the pretty one. My stomach turned because I knew exactly what she meant. She started small, Eleanor continued. Little lies, little stories. She'd tell my husband I said something cruel. She'd tell me he said something cruel. She'd twist every conversation until I couldn't trust my own memory. Eleanor's hands tightened slightly in her lap. Then she began telling people I was confused, forgetful, that I was slipping. She'd do it in that concerned voice, the one that makes everyone feel sorry for you while they quietly start doubting you. My skin prickled. That's what Candace is doing, I whispered. Eleanor nodded. Yes, she said. And that's why I knew what I was looking at tonight. She reached for the USB drive and held it up between her fingers. This is proof, she said. Not just of what happened at the lake, but of who she really is when she thinks no one is watching. My throat burned. I want to go to the police, I said, and the words spilled out fast. She assaulted me. I have bruises. Eleanor raised her hand. You can, she said, and you may even win, but you need to understand what happens next. I stared at her, desperate for guidance. Eleanor spoke carefully, like someone describing a storm pattern. Your sister will not panic, she said. She will perform. She will cry. She will become the victim. She will say you attacked her first. She will say you're unstable. Your mother will back her because she's terrified. Your father will freeze because he doesn't want scandal. My stomach dropped because I could already see it happening. I could already hear Candace's voice. My sister has always hated me. She's been acting weird. I was scared. Eleanor continued. And even if you win in court, she'll drag it out. She'll drain your energy, your money, your peace. She'll make you feel like you're drowning again, just in a different way. I stared down at my hands. So what am I supposed to do? I whispered. Eleanor leaned in closer, her eyes sharp. You make the people who have been protecting her see the truth with their own eyes, she said. You don't just tell them, you show them. Because when they witness it, they can't pretend it didn't happen. They can't rewrite it. They can't blame you for being dramatic. The words landed heavily. Show them. Not argue, not beg, not plead, not scream. Show them. My mind raced, and suddenly I remembered the folded napkin in my pocket. Linda Dalton's handwriting. Her phone number. Those 3 words. Call me. Private. I looked up at Eleanor. Linda knows, I said. She gave me her number. Eleanor's eyebrows lifted slightly, and for the first time I saw something like approval in her expression. Good, she said. That means you're not alone. I swallowed hard. But why would she help me? She's sick. She's fighting for her life. Eleanor's voice softened. Sometimes the sickest people are the clearest, she said. When you're facing death, you stop pretending. The room went quiet for a moment. The house around us creaked with the normal sounds of an old farmhouse settling. Somewhere downstairs, a floorboard shifted. A muffled laugh floated up Candace's laugh, light and careless, like she hadn't just tried to destroy me. My stomach clenched. I looked at Eleanor again. Why did you really come tonight? I asked. Eleanor held my gaze. Because I know what it feels like to be slowly erased, she said. And because I watched your sister push you into that lake, with the same expression my daughter wore when she destroyed me. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wasn't going to give Candace the satisfaction of breaking me, even if she wasn't in the room. Eleanor stood. Do you have a laptop? She asked. I nodded and pulled my old one from the desk drawer. My hands were still shaking, but the shaking felt different now. Less like fear, more like adrenaline. Eleanor plugged the USB into the computer. For a moment, I held my breath, terrified the file would be corrupted or empty or unusable. Like the universe would yank hope away just as it appeared. But then the video opened, and there it was. The lake, the mist, the path, my body, Candace's hands. I watched myself get shoved into the water. I watched Candace stand on the shore, still as stone, watching me struggle. And in the corner of the screen, I heard her voice clearer than it had been in real life. "You were supposed to lose it," she snapped. The sound of it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just cruelty. It was planning, calculation, a trap. Eleanor paused the video and looked at me. "Do you see it now?" she asked softly. "This wasn't a fight. This was an operation." I swallowed hard. "Yes," I whispered. "I see it." Eleanor nodded once. "Good," she said. "Because the moment you see it clearly, she loses something." "What?" I asked. Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Your fear," she said. "That's what she feeds on." I stared at the frozen frame of Candace on the screen, her posture calm, her face unreadable. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry in a clean, focused way. Not the messy anger that makes you scream and gives your enemy ammunition. The kind of anger that makes you plan. I closed the laptop slowly. "I'm calling Linda in the morning," I said. Eleanor smiled faintly. "At 6, she said. "Before anyone else wakes up. Before your sister has a chance to get ahead of you again." I nodded, my heart pounding, because Eleanor was right. Candace had been controlling the story for years by speaking first, by crying first, by shaping reality before anyone else could. But now, I had something Candace didn't expect. A witness. A recording. Proof. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the daughter no one listened to. I was the daughter who could finally make them see. I lay back on my bed after Eleanor left, staring at the ceiling as the house fell silent again. My body was still sore. My skin still smelled faintly like lake water, no matter how much I'd washed. But beneath all of it, something new had settled into place. Candace had tried to push me underwater literally and socially. And she almost succeeded. But she made one fatal mistake. She assumed no one would ever stand beside me. She assumed I would always be alone. And now, in the darkness of my childhood room, with a USB drive full of truth sitting on my desk, I realized something that made my chest tighten with a strange, steady hope. The story was no longer hers to write. I didn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old farmhouse creak and settle as if nothing had happened. As if my sister hadn't shoved me into a freezing lake hours earlier. As if my mother hadn't looked at me like I was the problem. As if the entire house wasn't filled with a quiet, poisonous lie. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Candace standing on the shore dry, calm, watching me struggle like it was entertainment. And worse than that, I heard her voice, sharp with irritation, not fear. "You were supposed to lose it." Not "I didn't mean to." Not "I'm sorry." "You were supposed to play your part." Around 5:30 in the morning, I got up and showered again even though my skin still felt raw from the night before. I put on clean clothes and sat at the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the folded napkin in my pocket like it was a lifeline. Linda Dalton's number. 3 words. "Call me. Private." At exactly 6, I dialed. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting in the dark with her phone in her hand the same way I had. "I knew you'd call," Linda said. Her voice was weak but steady. She sounded like someone who didn't have energy to waste on pretending. "I'm sorry," I whispered, because I didn't know what else to say. Sorry for what her husband was doing. Sorry for what my sister was doing. Sorry that she was sick and still had to fight this battle. Linda exhaled softly. "Don't apologize for them," she said. "Just listen." I sat back against the headboard, my heart pounding. "How long have you known?" I asked. 4 months, she said. "I found messages on Rick's phone. He didn't even try to hide it well. He was sloppy, emotional, guilty. Your sister wasn't." Her pause was heavy. Candace wasn't texting him like someone in love. She was texting him like someone closing a deal. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Linda's voice sharpened with bitterness. 8 months ago, Rick's father died, she said. Rick inherited money, a lot of it, and within days, your sister reached out to him. The first message she sent wasn't comfort. It wasn't sympathy. It was, "How much did he leave you?" I went still. Linda continued, and I could hear the effort it took her to speak. She came for him when he was grieving, and I was starting chemotherapy. She knew he was vulnerable. She knew I was weak. She knew he'd be easy to manipulate. My throat burned. How much did he inherit? I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. $800,000, Linda said. The probate finalized 2 weeks before your sister suddenly started showing up again. It's not a coincidence, Brittany. It's a pattern. 800,000. The number landed in my chest like a weight. I thought about the candles in the bathtub, the unlocked door, the rehearsed line. No one will believe you. It wasn't romance. It was strategy. Linda coughed softly, and it sounded painful. This isn't even the worst part, she said. I've been watching her. Watching her? I repeated. Yes, Linda said. The way she moves, the way she positions people, the way she makes herself the center of every room. I've seen women like her before. They don't want love, they want leverage. I swallowed. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Linda's answer came immediately. Because she's not just after Rick, she said. She's after anything she can get her hands on. The silence between us stretched. Then she said the sentence that made my blood run cold. Your parents have assets, don't they? I stared at the wall. Our parents weren't rich, but they had a house, retirement, savings, land. My father had worked his whole life. My mother had always been careful with money. They had enough to live comfortably if they were left alone. Linda continued. Your sister is systematic, and I suspect you're standing in her way. My pulse thundered. Candace wasn't just having an affair, she was building a future, a financial safety net, a plan that involved inheritance, control, and removing obstacles. And I was the obstacle. I exhaled shakily. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Linda's voice softened slightly. You do, she said. You just haven't let yourself believe you're allowed to do it. Before I could respond, she added. Also, be careful. She's already started setting you up. My stomach twisted. How do you know? Linda gave a humorless laugh. Because Rick told me, she said. He said Candace warned him, you might cause trouble, that you might make accusations, that you were unstable. So, it was true. Candace had been planting the story everywhere. I closed my eyes. She tried to push me into the lake last night, I whispered. Linda went silent for a beat. Then, her voice turned hard. That's not impulsive, she said. That's escalation. When the call ended, I sat there shaking not from fear, but from clarity. Candace wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And now I had something I'd never had before. A second person outside my family who could see it. Eleanor had the footage. Linda had the texts and the timeline. And I had something else too, something Candace didn't understand about me. I was an accountant. I lived in evidence. I lived in numbers, records, paper trails, patterns, and if Candace wanted to play a long game, I could play one too. That morning, Candace made her next move. She came downstairs wearing a soft sweater and an expression of gentle concern, like she was starring in a movie about a worried sister. She found my mother in the kitchen and spoke just loudly enough for me to hear from the hallway. I'm really worried about Brittany, she said, voice trembling. She's been saying strange things, making wild accusations. Last night she followed me to the lake and started screaming at me. I didn't know what to do. My grip tightened around the banister. She wasn't just lying. She was creating documentation. She was building a story where I was the aggressor. An hour later, my mother approached me with pleading eyes and shaking hands. Brittany, she said softly. Honey, maybe you should talk to someone. A professional. Just to sort through whatever you're going through. There it was. The trap. If I refused, I would look defensive, unstable. If I agreed, anything I said about Candace could be dismissed as paranoia, jealousy, delusion. Either way, Candace won. I stared at my mother, and for the first time I saw the depth of her fear. Her eyes were glossy, her shoulders hunched. She looked like she was begging me to cooperate so Candace wouldn't turn on her next. My anger flared, but I forced it down. Candace wanted emotion, she wanted drama. So I did the opposite. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said quietly. My mother blinked in surprise. Okay? Yes, I said, voice gentle. If you think it would help, I'll talk to someone. Candace, standing in the doorway behind her, looked almost disappointed, like she wanted me to fight. I didn't. I smiled weakly and walked outside. And the moment I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. Because if Candace was building a paper trail, I was going to build one too. That afternoon, I drove into town and went straight to the county records office. In Ohio, probate filings are public. Anyone can access them. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need permission. You just need patience. I sat at a computer terminal and typed in Rick Dalton's name. My hands were steady now. My mind was cold and clear, and within minutes, I found it. The inheritance, Ba Shuen Mei Yuan, finalized exactly 2 weeks before Candace randomly came back into Rick's orbit. My stomach twisted as I printed the record. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was fact. From there, I did something else. Something Candace never would have expected from the unstable older sister. I researched recording laws. Ohio is a one-party consent state. That meant if I was part of a conversation, I could legally record it without telling the other person. I wasn't planning anything illegal. I wasn't trying to entrap anyone. I was protecting myself. Because Candace's greatest weapon wasn't her beauty or her charm. It was the fact that she could say anything, and people believed her. If I wanted to survive this, I needed proof that couldn't be rewritten. That evening, I waited until I caught Candace alone on the back porch. The sun was low, and the air had that early fall chill that makes everything feel sharper. She was scrolling her phone, perfectly relaxed, like she hadn't tried to destroy me. I approached slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast. I made myself look defeated, because Candace always revealed the most when she thought she'd won. "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. She looked up, amused. "What? Do you even love Rick?" I asked. "Or is this just a game to you?" Her smile widened. She leaned back in her chair like she was enjoying herself. "Love," she laughed softly. "Brittany, Rick is a lottery ticket." My heart slammed against my ribs, but I kept my face blank. Candace continued, voice dripping with contempt. "Linda's dying anyway. I'll be there to comfort him when she's gone. And then I'll comfort his money." She took a sip of her drink, eyes glittering. "You should have stayed quiet. Now it's too late for you." She stood and walked inside like she'd just told me the weather. And I stood there, my phone warm in my hand, the recording still running. For the first time, I had her voice. Not a rumor, not a memory, not my word against hers. Her own confession. But even with that, one question still haunted me. Why did my mother obey her so completely? What secret could make a mother tremble in front of her own daughter? I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out. Because the next day, I couldn't stay under that roof anymore. I packed a bag and moved into Eleanor Brooks's guest room. And while I was planning my next step, my father, who had been silent for years, finally came to Eleanor's house with eyes red from lack of sleep. He sat across from me at her kitchen table, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. And he said the words I'd waited my whole life to hear. "I believe you." Then he swallowed hard and added something that made my blood run colder than the lake ever had. "And I've known Candace was like this for 15 years. When my father said, 'I believe you,' I felt something inside me crack open so suddenly I had to look away. Not because I didn't want him to see my face, but because I couldn't trust what would come out of my mouth if I looked at him too long. Relief and rage were tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. He sat across from me at Eleanor Brooks' kitchen table, shoulders slumped, hands clasped like he was trying to hold himself together. The morning light coming through Eleanor's lace curtains made him look older than I'd ever seen him. His hair was more gray than I remembered. His eyes were bloodshot, the kind of red you only get from nights without sleep. Eleanor set a mug of tea in front of him, and then quietly stepped away, giving us space. She didn't hover, she didn't pry. She just moved around her kitchen like someone who understood that some family truths need room to breathe. My father cleared his throat. "I know you're telling the truth," he said again, slower this time, like he needed to hear himself say it. "I know Candace staged it." My hands tightened around my own mug. "How?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. How could you know? And not do anything? His jaw clenched. His eyes flickered down to the table. Because I've been a coward, he admitted. The honesty of that hit me harder than any excuse would have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of Eleanor's old wall clock and the quiet hum of her refrigerator. Then my father finally looked up, and his voice turned heavy with shame. I've known Candace was different for 15 years, he said. I just didn't have the courage to face it. I didn't have the courage to face what it meant about our family. I swallowed hard. 15 years, I repeated, my voice shaking now. I've spent my entire life feeling crazy, Dad, like I was invisible, like I was always the problem. And you're telling me you knew? My father's eyes filled with tears. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't pretend he was fine. He just nodded. When Candace was 19, he began, I noticed money missing from my retirement account. $5,000. It was transferred out online. My stomach twisted. 5,000? I echoed. He nodded again. It was a lot for us at the time. I thought maybe it was a bank error. Your mother insisted it had to be hackers, Candace cried. She swore she didn't know anything. He paused, and I saw his hands tighten. But I checked the records. I traced the transfer. The money went into a bank account, opened under a name I didn't recognize. I dug deeper. My throat went dry. It was hers. It was Candace, he said quietly. She'd opened the account using a variation of her middle name. She thought I wouldn't notice. I felt sick. All those years I'd been working overtime, budgeting my life, trying to be responsible. My sister had been stealing from our parents. What did you do? I asked, voice sharp. Did you confront her? I tried, he said, and his voice cracked on the word. God, Brittany, I tried. He rubbed his face with both hands like he wanted to scrub the memory away. I went to your mother. I showed her the proof. I thought she would be furious. I thought she'd finally see what I saw. My father swallowed hard. But your mother didn't get angry. He looked at me, eyes glossy. She panicked. She begged me to let it go. She begged me to pretend it never happened. I stared at him. Why? My father's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like he was searching for the right words. At the time, I thought she was just protecting Candace, he said. I thought it was favoritism. I thought she couldn't accept that our daughter would steal from us. He shook his head slowly. But it wasn't just that. It was fear. Your mother was terrified. The word hit me like a punch. Fear. It was the same fear I'd seen in my mother's hands when she tried to silence me in the kitchen. The same fear in her eyes when Candace whispered in her ear during dinner. The same fear that made her beg me to keep the peace like peace was the only thing keeping us alive. My father leaned forward, lowering his voice. After that, he continued, every time Candace did something wrong, your mother would fold. She'd excuse it, cover it, defend her, and I kept telling myself it was because she loved her too much. He looked down at his tea, the surface trembling slightly. But deep down, I knew something else was going on. I just couldn't figure out what. I felt my throat tighten. So you stayed quiet, I said. He flinched at my tone. Yes, he whispered. I stayed quiet. I thought I was protecting the family. I thought if we just got through the next crisis, the next drama, the next mess, things would settle. He let out a bitter laugh. But with Candace, there is always another crisis. I stared at him, and for a moment I didn't know what to feel. Part of me wanted to stand up and scream. Part of me wanted to collapse into his arms like a child and finally be held. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning in me since the lake. Dad, I said, voice shaking. Why is Mom afraid of her? My father went still. His eyes widened slightly, like I'd touched something dangerous. For a long moment, he didn't answer. He stared at the table, and I watched the muscles in his jaw work as if he was biting down on a truth too sharp to swallow. Then he whispered, "There's something I never told you." My heart dropped. He inhaled slowly, then said, 15 years ago, I discovered something about your mother. I sat up straighter. Eleanor, in the other room, stopped moving. Even she seemed to sense the weight of what was coming. My father's voice lowered. Before you were born, he said, your mother and I went through a very rough patch. We almost divorced. She made a mistake. I felt my skin go cold. She had an affair, he said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. I blinked, trying to process it. My mother, the woman who had spent my entire life preaching loyalty and family and forgiveness. The woman who cried at church hymns and clipped coupons and made casseroles for sick neighbors. She cheated? I whispered. My father nodded, eyes filled with pain. It happened a long time ago, he said. I didn't find out until years later. It nearly destroyed me. But I loved her, and I forgave her. We rebuilt. We moved forward. He swallowed hard. I thought it was buried. I thought it was something only we carried. My heart pounded. So how does Candace know? My father shook his head. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe she overheard a conversation. Maybe she found old letters. Maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to see. But she found out. He looked up at me, and his eyes were haunted. And she's been holding it over your mother ever since. The room spun. Blackmail, I whispered. My father nodded. Every time your mother tried to set boundaries, he said, voice breaking. Every time she tried to discipline Candace, Candace threatened to reveal it. She threatened to tell you. She threatened to tell the town. She threatened to destroy your mother's reputation. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I thought of my mother's trembling hands, her pleading eyes, her desperate need to keep the peace. She wasn't choosing Candace over me because Candace was her favorite. She was choosing Candace because Candace was holding a knife to her throat. And suddenly, everything in my childhood rearranged itself. All the times my mother dismissed me. All the times she told me I was overreacting. All the times she begged me to let it go when Candace hurt me. It wasn't just favoritism. It was survival. It was fear and shame being used as chains. I sat there, stunned, feeling something I didn't expect. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. My mother wasn't just an enabler. She was Candace's first victim. And that realization hurt in a completely different way. My father wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his voice raw. I should have protected you, he said. I should have protected both of you. But I was afraid too. Afraid of what? I asked. He shook his head. Afraid of losing my marriage, he admitted. Afraid of scandal. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of admitting my own daughter was capable of this. He gestured vaguely, as if the word evil was too big to say out loud. I took a shaky breath. So Mom has been trapped for 15 years, I said slowly. My father nodded. Yes, he whispered. And she let you take the damage because she thought it was the only way to keep the secret buried. My stomach twisted. I could feel my anger rising hot and sharp because even if my mother was a victim, I had still been sacrificed. I had still spent my life being gaslit and dismissed. Her fear explained her choices, but it didn't erase the harm. Eleanor stepped back into the kitchen then, her face gentle but serious. She didn't interrupt with questions. She just placed a plate of toast on the table, like she was grounding us in something ordinary. My father looked at me, and his voice steadied slightly. Brittany, he said, Candace is doing the same thing now. She's using secrets, fear, leverage. She's controlling the narrative. I nodded slowly. Not anymore, I said. My father's eyes widened. What do you mean? I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of evidence I'd started collecting. The probate record showing Rick's inheritance timeline, the notes from Linda, the recording on my phone, the USB drive from Eleanor. I have proof, I said quietly. Not just of what she did to me at the lake, but of what she's doing to Rick, to Linda, to all of us. My father stared at the papers like he couldn't believe this was real. I leaned forward, voice firm. I'm done being invisible, I said. I'm done being the one who stays quiet so everyone else can pretend. My father swallowed. What are you going to do? I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter asking permission. I felt like a woman making a decision. We're going to make them see, I said. Eleanor nodded from behind me, as if she'd been waiting for those words. My father exhaled slowly. Candace won't go down quietly, he warned. I know, I said. Because Candace wasn't just a liar. She was a predator. And predators don't stop until someone forces them. I took a deep breath and felt the pieces finally lock into place. Candace's power had always come from secrecy, from people being too ashamed, too scared, too exhausted to speak. But if we put the truth in the open, if we removed the secret she used as a weapon, then she'd have nothing left to hold over my mother, nothing left to control my father, nothing left to use against me. And the most important part? She wouldn't be able to rewrite reality anymore. I didn't know exactly how the confrontation would go yet. I didn't know how ugly it would get, or how far Candace would try to drag us down with her. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the last time I would ever let my sister push me underwater. Not in a lake, not in a lie, not in my own life. And as I sat there in Eleanor's warm kitchen, surrounded by evidence and the first fragile pieces of truth, I realized something else too. Something that felt almost impossible after 36 years of being dismissed. I wasn't alone anymore, and Candace had no idea what was coming. I chose the moment carefully, because people like Candace don't lose when you confront them in private. They lose when they have an audience they can't control. For 6 days, I lived in Eleanor Brooks' guest room, sleeping on clean sheets that smelled like lavender and old books, waking up every morning with the same heavy thought pressing on my chest. If I do this wrong, she'll destroy me. But the difference now was that I wasn't guessing anymore. I wasn't reacting blindly. I had proof. I had witnesses. I had a plan. Linda had sent me screenshots of the messages she found on Rick's phone, Candace's early texts, the ones that weren't flirtation but calculation. My father brought copies of the old bank records, the transfer Candace made from his retirement account 15 years ago. Eleanor had the security footage of Candace pushing me into the lake. And I had the recording on my phone, Candace's voice, crystal clear, laughing about how Rick was a lottery ticket and how Linda was dying anyway. Every piece alone was damaging. Together, they were devastating. The only thing missing was the right room, the right timing, the right faces. So, I waited until Rick came back to my parents' house. He didn't come because he cared about Candace. He came because Candace summoned him, and men like Rick, weak men, respond to whoever makes them feel less guilty. That afternoon, my father called me and said, "He's here." My stomach clenched. I looked at Eleanor, who was pouring tea like it was just another day. "Ready?" she asked. I didn't feel ready, but I nodded. When I walked back into my parents' farmhouse, the air felt different, like the house itself knew something was about to break. Everyone was in the living room. My mother sitting rigidly on the couch, hands clasped in her lap. My father standing near the fireplace, arms crossed. Candace perched in an armchair with her legs tucked beneath her, wearing a soft sweater and an expression that could have been mistaken for innocence if you didn't know her. Rick sat on the edge of the love seat, shoulders hunched, eyes darting like a trapped animal. They all looked up when I entered. Candace's eyes narrowed instantly. My mother's face went pale. "Brittany," she began, voice trembling. "We weren't expecting." "I know," I said calmly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. That steadiness was my weapon now. I stepped forward and set my bag down on the coffee table. "But it's time," I said. Candace tilted her head. "Time for what?" she asked, tone sweet. I looked at her, and for a moment I saw the old dynamic trying to reassert itself, the way she expected me to shrink, to apologize for existing, to doubt myself. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "It's time for everyone to see the truth," I said. Candace's smile twitched. "Oh my God," she sighed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Are we doing this again? Brittany, you really need help." There it was. The script. The exact same line she'd planted in my mother's head. The same line Rick had tried to repeat outside the garage. The same line she'd been feeding to anyone who might listen. I didn't respond. I connected my phone to the television with the adapter my father had set up for me earlier. The screen blinked. Then the first video appeared. Eleanor's security footage. The room fell silent as the lake filled the screen. The mist, the path, Candace and me standing at the edge of the water. Then the shove. My body stumbled backward. The splash, my hands flailing. The sound of me choking as I surfaced. My mother made a strangled sound and covered her mouth. My father's jaw tightened so hard I thought it might crack. Rick went pale, his eyes wide with horror. Candace didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just sat perfectly still, watching herself on the screen like she was studying a stranger. When the video ended, Candace let out a small laugh, sharp and dismissive. "That's not what happened," she said quickly. "She followed me out there screaming. She slipped. She's twisting it." I held up my hand. "There's more," I said. And before she could build momentum, I played the audio recording. Candace's voice filled the living room, unmistakable, dripping with contempt. "Love? Rick is a lottery ticket. Linda's dying anyway. I'll be there to comfort him when she's gone. And then I'll comfort his money." My mother's face crumpled. A sob escaped her like it had been trapped in her throat for years. Rick's head dropped into his hands. Candace's expression finally shifted, rage flashing through the mask. "You recorded me?" she hissed. "Yes," I said simply. Her eyes burned. "That's illegal." My father spoke for the first time, his voice low and firm. "It's not," he said. "Ohio is a one-party consent state." She was part of the conversation. Candace's gaze snapped to him, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. She hadn't expected my father to be prepared. She hadn't expected him to be on my side. I reached into my bag again and pulled out the printed probate record. "This is public," I said, placing it on the coffee table. Rick inherited $800,000. The inheritance finalized 2 weeks before Candace suddenly reappeared in his life. Rick flinched at the number, like hearing it out loud made it real in a way he couldn't deny. Candace scoffed. "So what?" she snapped. "People date people with money all the time." Linda's name wasn't spoken, but it hovered in the room like a ghost. Everyone knew she was sick. Everyone knew what Candace had done was more than immoral, it was predatory. My mother was shaking now. "Candace," she whispered. "Is this true?" Candace turned toward her instantly, eyes softening, voice becoming syrupy. "Mom, don't listen to her," she said. "You know Brittany. She's always been jealous. She's always tried to ruin things for me. She's mentally unstable. She needs help." She said it so smoothly, so confidently, like she'd said it 1,000 times. And I realized something chilling. Candace wasn't improvising. She had rehearsed this confrontation in her head long before it happened. She had lines ready, facial expressions ready, tears ready if she needed them. But she hadn't planned for one thing. She hadn't planned for the secret she used to control my mother to be dragged into the light. I turned to my mother. My mother's eyes widened, terror flashing across her face. She knew what I was about to do. She knew the weapon Candace had been holding over her for 15 years. I took a slow breath. My voice softened not for Candace, but for my mother. "I know why you've been afraid," I said gently. "I know what Candace has been holding over you." Candace's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. My mother began to cry before I even said the words. Silent tears sliding down her cheeks, her body trembling like a frightened child. "I know about the affair," I said. The room went so quiet it felt like the air had been sucked out. Rick looked up, confused. Candace went perfectly still. My father's face tightened with pain, but he didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. I walked toward my mother and took her trembling hands in mine. "Dad forgave you a long time ago," I said softly. "And I forgive you now. Candace can't hurt you with it anymore because it's not a secret anymore." My mother let out a sob that sounded like a dam breaking. 15 years of fear poured out of her all at once. She clutched my hands like she was drowning. Candace's face twisted. "You liar," she spat. "You're trying to turn them against me." My father stepped forward, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "Enough," he said. Candace froze. He pointed at her. "I have proof of what you did 15 years ago," he said. "The bank records. The transfer from my retirement account. You stole $5,000. Your mother begged me to destroy the evidence, but I didn't. I kept copies because I knew deep down I knew this day would come." Candace's eyes widened. For the first time, her confidence cracked. She looked around the room, searching for someone to rescue her. My mother was sobbing. My father was standing tall. And I wasn't shaking anymore. Rick's breathing turned ragged. He looked like he might bolt. Candace's voice rose. "This is insane," she shouted. "You're all ganging up on me because Brittany is manipulating you." And then Rick did the one thing Candace never expected. He turned on her. "It was her idea," he blurted, pointing at Candace like she was poison. "She told me to meet her at her parents' house that day. She said Brittany would find us and freak out. She said she'd make a scene and everyone would see how unstable she is. She told me to stick to the story." Candace's head whipped toward him. "Shut up!" she screamed. But it was too late. Rick's confession poured out like vomit. "She told me exactly what to say. She said your mother would believe her. She said your father wouldn't want a scandal. She said Brittany would look crazy and no one would listen to her." My mother stared at Rick, horrified. My father looked like he might hit him. Candace's face turned white. I felt something settle inside me, something calm and final. This was it. The moment Candace lost control, down, because the power she'd held over our family wasn't strength. It was secrecy. And now, every secret was out. Candace tried to recover. She straightened her posture, wiped an imaginary tear from her cheek, and forced her voice into a tremble. "You're all doing this because you hate me," she said. "Because you can't stand that I'm the one who—" "No," I interrupted softly. My voice cut through her performance like a knife. "We're doing this because you hurt people," I said. "Because you've been hurting people for years, and we've all been too afraid to say it out loud." Candace's eyes locked onto mine, pure hatred burning there. For a second, I thought she might lunge at me. But she didn't. Because for the first time, she knew she couldn't win. Not with charm. Not with tears. Not with lies. My father's voice shook, but it held firm. "You're done here," he said. Candace laughed bitterly. "You can't kick me out," she snapped. "This is my home too." My father's eyes didn't waver. "No," he said. "It's not. You haven't lived here in years. And you will not live here again." My mother's sobbing quieted into stunned silence. She stared at Candace like she was seeing her for the first time, like the spell had finally broken. Rick stood abruptly, face gray. "I need to go," he muttered, backing toward the door. Candace whipped toward him again. "Don't you dare leave," she screamed. "You owe me." Rick flinched. Then he did something almost pathetic. He ran. The front door slammed. The living room fell into a silence so thick it felt like it had weight. Candace stood in the center of it, breathing hard, her eyes darting, trying to find a way out, trying to find a new angle. But there was nowhere left to turn. I looked at my mother. She was shaking, but she was also freer than I'd ever seen her, like someone who had been holding their breath for 15 years and had finally exhaled. Candace stared at her, then at my father, then at me. And in that moment, I saw something I never thought I'd see on my sister's face. Fear. Not fear of consequences. Fear of being powerless. Because her entire life, she'd controlled people by making them afraid. And now, for the first time, no one was afraid of her anymore. Candace stormed out of the living room, slamming the hallway door so hard the picture frames rattled. My mother collapsed against the couch, sobbing into her hands. My father sat down slowly, like his legs had finally given out. And I stood there, feeling a strange emptiness. Not triumph, not joy, just the quiet shock of watching a monster lose its mask. But the story wasn't over. Because Candace wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat with dignity. She was the kind of person who burned everything down on her way out. And I knew, deep in my bones, that her final move was still coming. Candace didn't leave quietly. I should have known she wouldn't. People like her don't walk away from losing. They don't sit with shame and reflect on what they've done. They don't apologize. They don't rebuild. They don't even mourn the damage they caused. They retaliate. They burn everything down and try to drag you into the ashes with them. The night after the confrontation, I stayed at Eleanor's house again. My father insisted I shouldn't sleep under the same roof as Candace, not after what she'd already done at the lake. And even though Candace had stormed out of the living room like she'd been humiliated, I could still feel her presence like a storm cloud hovering over the entire property. That night, my phone buzzed, constantly missed calls from my mother, a text from my father asking if I was safe, and then silence. For almost 2 weeks, Candace disappeared. No dramatic apology. No angry messages, no midnight threats. And that silence should have comforted me. Instead, it made my skin crawl. Because Candace wasn't the type to disappear when she was cornered. She was the type to regroup. And when she came back, she didn't come back with remorse. She came back with a weapon. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, about 2 weeks after everything blew up. I was at my apartment in Columbus, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at my laptop screen without really seeing it. Work emails blurred together. Numbers didn't call me the way they usually did. Then Eleanor called. "Have you looked at Facebook?" she asked. The tone of her voice made my stomach drop. "No," I said slowly. "Why?" "Because your sister just posted something," Eleanor replied. "And it's exactly what I warned you about." I opened Facebook with shaking hands. Candace had written a long, emotional post. Not the kind that looks like a rant. The kind that looks like a carefully crafted speech meant to make strangers feel sorry for her. She called herself the victim. She said she'd been betrayed by her own family. She said her older sister, me, had always been jealous, always unstable, always desperate for attention. She claimed I had fabricated a story to destroy her because I couldn't stand that she was successful and loved. Successful. I almost laughed. Candace hadn't held a steady job in years, but she knew something about social media. People don't fact-check emotion. They just react. She wrote about how toxic our parents were, how they'd always favored me, and how she'd spent her whole life trying to prove herself. She implied I had mental health issues. She implied I needed treatment. She implied she feared for her safety. Then she dropped the final line like a match thrown into gasoline. "I'm being punished for being the strong one," she wrote. "Some families hate the child who refuses to be controlled." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. For a few minutes, the post seemed to work. People commented things like, "Stay strong, sweetie. Family can be so toxic. Praying for you." The words made my chest tighten with anger. But then something happened that Candace couldn't control. A name appeared in the comments. Rachel Martinez. The same Rachel from the photograph on my parents' mantle. The crazy, jealous friend Candace claimed she'd cut off years ago. Rachel's comment wasn't long. "It didn't need to be. Candace did the exact same thing to me," Rachel wrote. "She seduced my husband, and when I confronted her, she told everyone I was mentally unstable. I lost my marriage, my friends, my reputation. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to believe me. Thank you, Brittany Shaw, for finally exposing the truth." I stared at the screen, my breath catching. My heart pounded not with fear, but with a strange, electric feeling. Vindication. Not the petty kind. The kind that makes you realize you were never crazy. You were just surrounded by people who chose to believe the wrong person. Candace responded immediately. "Of course. Rachel, you're obsessed," she wrote. "You need help. This is harassment." But Rachel didn't back down. She replied with something that made my stomach drop. A screenshot. A message thread from years ago, Candace flirting with Rachel's husband, then laughing about it afterward. The date was visible. The tone was unmistakable. Candace's writing style hadn't even changed. Within minutes, more comments poured in. Another woman, Jennifer, wrote that Candace had tried the same thing with her fiancé 5 years ago. A woman named Maria shared that Candace borrowed $3,000 and never repaid it, then told everyone Maria was crazy when she asked for the money back. A former coworker commented that Candace had been fired for stealing cash from the register and somehow convinced the manager not to press charges because she cried and threatened to sue. Each comment alone could have been dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern so clear it felt like a spotlight. A decade of victims. A decade of gaslighting. A decade of Candace destroying people and then calling them unstable when they reacted. And then came the worst one. Someone posted the screenshot Linda had shown me months earlier, the text Candace sent to Rick just days after his father died. "How much did he leave you?" it read. "We should celebrate your good fortune together." The timestamp was right there. The calculation was undeniable. I felt sick. Not because I was surprised, but because I realized how long Candace had been operating like this. How many people she'd hurt. How many lives she'd poisoned. How many stories she'd rewritten. Candace's post had gone viral in our small community within hours. But not the way she intended. It wasn't sympathy she got. It was exposure. And what shocked me most wasn't the cruelty of the comments. It was the speed. The way people who had been quiet for years suddenly felt safe enough to speak when someone else finally did first. That's how predators survive. Not because everyone believes them, but because everyone stays silent. And once silence breaks, the entire structure collapses. Candace tried to regain control. She posted another comment, then deleted it. She accused people of bullying. She threatened legal action. She claimed the screenshots were fake. But the more she fought, the worse she looked. By midnight, Candace deleted the entire post. By the next morning, her Facebook account was gone. But screenshots live forever, especially in a small town where people treat drama like currency. Within days, Candace Shaw became a cautionary tale. The woman you warn your daughters about, the friend you don't trust around your husband, the person you don't lend money to, the person you don't invite to gatherings. She didn't just lose her reputation, she lost her access. And in a person like Candace, access is everything. While Candace's online meltdown unfolded, real-life consequences were hitting too. Linda filed for divorce. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted dignity. Her lawyer cited dissipation of marital assets, Rick spending their shared money on gifts, trips, and hotel rooms, while Linda was fighting cancer. In a small Ohio County courtroom, the judge didn't need a dramatic speech to understand what happened. Everyone knew Rick. Everyone knew Linda. Everyone knew what cancer does to a family. There was no sympathy for him. Rick's real estate business collapsed faster than I expected. Clients canceled. His business partner dissolved their agreement. People stopped returning his calls. In a profession built on trust, once trust is gone, you don't get it back by moving to a new zip code. Within weeks, Rick sold his house at a loss and relocated to another state, hoping anonymity could wash away his shame. Linda kept the house. And even though she was still fighting cancer, she was fighting with her spine intact. She sent me a card a few weeks later. "You gave me courage when I had none," she wrote. "I was waiting for months for someone strong enough to stand with me. You were that person. Thank you for helping me save myself." I cried when I read it. Not because I felt like a hero, but because it made me realize something that hit deeper than revenge ever could. My suffering had meant something. By standing up for myself, I'd helped someone else stand up too. At my parents' house, the aftermath was quieter, but heavier. My father moved into the guest bedroom the week after the confrontation. He told me later what he'd said to my mother. "Candace used your secret to control you," he told her. "I understand fear. I forgave you for the affair years ago, but I cannot forgive how you let her use it against our daughter. For 15 years, you watched Brittany be dismissed, gaslit, and pushed aside. You did nothing." My mother began therapy. And a month later, she wrote me a letter. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't full of excuses. It wasn't a performance like Candace would write. It was simple. She admitted the favoritism, the silence, the betrayal. She admitted she had been afraid, and she admitted fear didn't excuse what she allowed. I read it 3 times. Then I put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness isn't something you hand out because someone finally feels guilty. Forgiveness is something you consider when you see sustained change. And I wasn't there yet. I texted her one sentence. "I'll consider rebuilding our relationship when I see consistent actions over time." Not words. For the first time in her life, my mother had to sit in the waiting room of consequences. She had to feel what it was like to reach for a daughter who might not come back quickly, or ever. As for Candace, there was no final confrontation, no satisfying goodbye speech, No dramatic moment where she begged me for forgiveness. She simply vanished. Not completely. People like her always pop up somewhere else, trying to start over, trying to find new victims. But she vanished from my life. And the strangest part? I didn't feel triumphant. I felt quiet. Like someone who had been holding their breath for 36 years and finally exhaled. Eleanor became my anchor. Every Sunday, I drove to her house and we drank tea on her porch. She'd talk about birds, gardening, her late husband, and sometimes, when she saw the shadows in my eyes, she'd remind me of something I needed to hear. Blood makes relatives, she said one afternoon, watching the trees sway. Choice makes family. I thought about that for a long time. Because the truth was, I hadn't chosen Candace. I hadn't chosen my mother's fear. I hadn't chosen the role of invisible daughter. But I could choose what came next. I could choose boundaries. I could choose peace. I could choose the people who saw me without making me earn it through suffering. And in the months that followed, my relationship with my father grew stronger. We talked on the phone every week, real conversations, not just polite updates. He stopped pretending everything was fine. He stopped excusing my mother's denial. He stopped ignoring the uncomfortable truth. For the first time in my life, my father saw me clearly. And he told me he was proud of me, not for exposing Candace, not for humiliating anyone, but for finally refusing to drown, because that's what Candace had been trying to do since we were kids. She didn't just want attention. She wanted power. And her power came from making everyone else feel small. I didn't destroy her. I simply stopped being afraid of her. And the moment I stopped being afraid, she had nothing left. Because the truth is, some people don't lose because someone attacks them. They lose because someone finally stops protecting them from consequences. And that was my real revenge. Not screaming. Not violence. Not hatred. Just clarity. Just boundaries. Just truth. From that day forward, no one would ever push me underwater again, literally or emotionally. Not because they wouldn't try, but because I finally learned how to swim. If there's one thing Brittany's story proves, it's that the most dangerous people aren't always loud or violent. Sometimes they're the ones who smile while they rewrite your reality, the ones who make everyone doubt you before you even speak. For 36 years, Brittany thought staying quiet would earn her love, but silence never protects you from someone who feeds on control. It only teaches them they can keep going. What makes this story hit so hard isn't just the betrayal in that bathroom, or even the moment Candace pushed her into the lake. It's the deeper truth underneath it all. How families can become prisons when fear, shame, and secrets are used as chains. And how healing doesn't always look like forgiveness, it often looks like boundaries, evidence, and finally choosing yourself. If you've ever been gaslit, ignored, or made to feel invisible by someone you were supposed to trust, I hope this story reminds you that you are not crazy for seeing what you saw. You deserve to be believed. You deserve peace. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you want more emotional, gripping stories like this, please subscribe to Hanji Wie Iyagi and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one.